All right, so let's get into my review of this week's episode of The Last of Us, which is titled Please Hold to My Hand. Okay, so this episode picks up, shortly after we left off in episode 3. And I just want to give you my overall thoughts about this episode, overall spoiler-free thoughts before I get into some spoilers and everything. Um, I thought this was a very solid episode. It moves the story forward in terms of their geographical location and Ellie and Joel's relationship. I think it does a great job of like getting them closer and closer to being not only civil towards each other, but even playful and like a father. It's getting closer to that father daughter type relationship in this episode, which was nice to see, even though Joel is still fighting it and everything. That's one of my biggest takeaways from this episode. Um, this episode was less controversial than the last one, I'll say, but it also does deviate from the game again. And I had a little bit of a nitpick with that I'll get into in a little bit later. But overall, I really enjoyed this episode. It introduces us to some new characters and a new location, and which also has some added tension with it and everything. So this was a solid episode. This I'd probably give this one like an 8 out of 10. I thought it was pretty solid. So next, I want to get into my whole kind of breakdown of the episode, and then I'll talk about some of the comparisons between the game and the show, and then get into some of the inside the episode information with the creators of the show. So this episode picks up again where episode 3 left off. They got the truck from Bill and Frank. They got their supplies, and they're ready to go and continue on their journey. They stop at this old gas station, and Ellie is practicing with the gun she took, which was Frank's gun. And Joel at this point doesn't know that she has the gun, but she's kind of practicing in the bathroom mirror. It kind of reminded me of that scene from Back to the Future Part 3 when Marty, has his gun in the mirror and he's kind of saying, like, go ahead, make my day. It kind of reminded me of that scene. And, where he's impersonating Clint Eastwood and everything. Joel, meanwhile, while this is happening, is siphoning gas from other vehicles, which, is a smart move given the fact that they're driving a great distance. So where do they get all the gas from? So that at least gives a little explanation for that. And one of the best things about this episode for me was Ellie telling jokes from this pun book that she had in her bag. I'm guessing she found it somewhere along the way. And she references these jokes like in the beginning and the end of the episode. One of them was like, why did the Scarecrow win an award? Because he was outstanding in his field. And Joel's trying not to laugh and everything, and but you can tell that she's starting to like get to him and crack that shell he's starting to break down those walls that he has built up. There's also a joke later in the episode where Ellie's like, did you know diarrhea is hereditary? And he's like, what? And she's like, yeah, it runs in your genes. So just another, and he actually, Joel actually laughed at this joke. And that was the first time we've really seen Joel smile or laugh in this whole series, probably. Um, Another moment I really liked in this episode was when Joel was standing guard while Ellie was sleeping in the woods. And just showing that he is committed to keeping her safe and everything, even though he's built these walls up um, in fear that he would lose another person close to him. Um, on their car ride, well, in the truck ride, I guess I'll say, he talks a little bit about Tommy, says, and just reminds us that Tommy is out there. Our main goal is getting to Tommy in Wyoming, and that he describes Tommy as a joiner, and he uh, he describes Tommy as a joiner. He was in the army apparently, and then he joined the Fireflies when everything went down, and Joel kind of mocks him, saying he wants to save the world and everything. but it turns out Joel has to kind of get him out of trouble once again, where he's not very pleased with that. But again, he likes to be that hero and he wants to be that guy, even while he's kind of complaining about it. Um, what happens next is they actually arrive in um, Kansas City, and I was expecting this to be Pittsburgh because in the game, they go to Pittsburgh. I thought maybe this shot here of this bridge was like, oh, maybe that's Pittsburgh, and we're gonna see that and everything. It reminds me of one of the bridges over like the Three Rivers, or something like that. But it ends up that we're in Kansas City, and it's very similar to the arrival in Pittsburgh in the game. The cars are kind of piled up, traffic's piled up everywhere. All these old beat up vehicles, and they really they're going to have to go through the city, and they didn't want to have to do that for obvious reasons. um, but that's their kind of path is blocked off. And then shortly after that, they're ambushed um, by this new group, maybe this resistance group. um, in the game, I think maybe they were called hunters. Maybe this is what these people are, but they're given more of kind of a backstory here, at least with their leader. So they're ambushed by this group. The truck wrecks. It's very similar to the game, and then Ellie has to save Joel with Frank's gun, and that there are repercussions for that whole thing. But it's kind of ironic, that Joel didn't want her to have a gun, but then he needed saving in this episode, or in this part of the story. We are introduced to a new character named Kathleen, who's played by Melanie Linsky, and I don't really take her as the leading type of person. So it's interesting, like, how did she become the leader of this resistance group in Kansas City? They took over a quarantine zone. I'm guessing they took over Fedra in Kansas City. But in the inside the episode, the creators, well, in the podcast, actually, the creators tease that we will find out how she became the leader, because normally she wouldn't be like necessarily cast in this type of role. So there is a reason for that. And she's looking for Henry, who she says is responsible for her brother's death. And Harry, I'm sorry, yeah, Henry and Sam are both characters from the video game that we get introduced to as well. So this is all happening, and in the meantime, Joel seems to be feeling pretty bad that Ellie had to shoot that person to save him, and just keeps saying things like, you shouldn't have had to do that. You're so young, all these things. And Ellie is upset too. And, she's visibly upset, but she also reveals that it wasn't her first time um, acting out in violence, killing somebody. I'm not sure what she's referring to, but she says it wasn't her first time. But she's obviously bothered by what she did, and it does have her rattled a bit, because she's been so obsessed with having a gun, and was intrigued when Joel like really beat that dude up in the first episode to protect her. But when it comes down to it, actually harming somebody, actually doing harm to someone does affect you, no matter what. For most people, I would say, anyway. And so Joel does eventually give her a gun and shows her how to use it. I feel like he gets to this point where, okay, I'm going to have to trust you with a gun now, but I'm going to show you how to use it the right way. And so that was a good moment between them two. Although Joel tells her to put the gun in her bag, and of course she puts it in her pocket instead, because, she's not really living by the what you say goes Joel rules. But, I guess I would want quicker access to the gun myself if I was in Ellie's shoes. So I get it. Another thing that I noticed about this episode was that I liked about the video game too, was Joel kind of boosting Ellie up to get in through a window, and then she has to go in and find a way to let him in. It was just reminiscent of the video game for me, and some of the gameplay in that. I really love the interactions between Joel and Ellie in this episode. I feel their relationship really grew a bit in this episode through their conversations, through even the jokes. Joel revealing to her things about Tommy, her making him laugh, him giving her the gun. I feel like there were a lot of steps forward in their relationship, which is probably what I enjoyed most about this episode. Um, and then by the end of this episode, we get a scene where Joel's basically they've climbed all these flights of stairs in this building and they're gonna sleep for the night, but Joel like lays all this, I think it's like broken glass all over the floor to alert him if somebody um were to come in there. But he kind of says he's going deaf in his right ear, just like I am at my ripe age. But I think he ended up like turning and sleeping on the wrong ear or whatever. So he didn't hear these two characters who show up at the end of this episode, and they have a gun pointed at Ellie, and it's Henry and his younger brother Sam, again, who are characters in the show. So those are kind of the major plot points and things that stood out to me about this episode. But I also want to get into some comparisons between the game and the show. First of all, there's the scene in the truck um, where we have Ellie giving Joel a Hank Williams cassette, and Ellie looking at this men's magazine and saying the same words she says in the game, like, I want to see what all the fuss is about. And then she, you know, jokes, why are the pages sticking together, and throws the magazine out of the window. It's pretty much beat for beat the same as the game, which was cool. Um, Again, the approach to Kansas City, even though in the game it's Pittsburgh, was very similar to the game. But Pittsburgh's like my favorite city. It's my hometown teams that I root for, and I go to Pittsburgh often. So I was kind of bummed we didn't get to see that. But that was a difference from the game in this situation. Um, and also just the stuff with the truck being wrecked and Ellie saving Joel, that was the same, very, or at least very similar in the show and the game. In both the game and the show, uh, they have to go up those flight of stairs, and Ellie kind of asked Joel, "How did you know that when we got here it was an ambush?" And he says, "I've been on both sides." So he's been in that situation where he was in a group trying to ambush others to take supplies to get by, but now he's on the other side of that too. So he can kind of anticipate what those people are going to do. I also want to get into some of the inside the episode information here that I learned through the podcast, and the inside the episode that happens after the show. Ellie again is obsessed with having a gun and asks Joel questions because what the creators, Craig Mason and Neil Druckmann, kind of say, she's preparing herself for this violent act that she's probably going to have to commit in this world that they're living in, and she doesn't want to have to rely on Joel to save her. Basically, she wants to be able to take care of herself. But again, we realize that it's harder, it's easier said than done when it comes down to her actually shooting that person, especially when that person's kind of like begging for his life and everything. The line that Joel says when they're in the truck too, he says, "Your cargo." Um, the creators kind of revealed that Joel says this because that's what he wants to be true, so that he doesn't open himself up to that pain and that loss again, like he did with obviously his daughter that he loved very much, and with Tess, who he also kind of failed to protect, and he doesn't want that to happen again. So that's why these walls are up, and um, he's just saying your cargo. He doesn't really mean that, I don't think, but that's what he wants to believe. So I also was asking the question in this episode, why Kansas City? Well, Craig Mason explained, and Neil Druckmann, one of the two, explained that they were filming in Canada and they couldn't capture the Pittsburghness of Pittsburgh, which it is a very unique place. So I'll give them that. So I guess I'll accept that reason, even though I wanted to see Pittsburgh here. But it also pushed them further along the map. In Kansas City versus being in Pittsburgh at this point in the show. Um, Another we had what was kind of a cameo here, I guess, but Jeffrey Pierce, who voiced Tommy in the video game, plays the role of Kathleen's lieutenant, Perry. And they seem to be hiding what I think is underground here, or whatever this rubble or whatever it is. I think there's a giant infected under here. In the game, we called it a bloater. So I think that's what we're gonna see in the next episode. Is that the preview definitely made it seem like we're gonna see some action. It's gonna be an action-packed episode, and it looks like this foursome of Ellie and Joel, Henry, and Sam are gonna have to go up against this group or the bloater, or it's gonna get pretty wild. So that's what I think is going to happen on the next episode. But what did you guys think of episode 4 of The Last of Us? Again, episode 5 is coming a little bit earlier this week on Friday instead of Sunday. So I'm going to be excited to check that out sooner this week. But let me know, what did you guys think of this episode? And be sure to stay tuned to From a Certain Point of View for future reviews of The Last of Us.